Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys in the Bible, right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I am William Bell, and we are delighted to be with you this evening and looking forward to another great study. With me is my illustrious co-host, Dr. Don Preston. Don, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, William, in under the line, just like you were.
Well, you have to know the full story.
Okay.
I've forgotten to set up the broadcast, really. Normally, I do it right after we finish, the show. I must have gotten distracted last week and hadn't taken a look at it. And so I came to sign in, and there was no show. So I had to set it up, like, on the moment and get started. But we made it in under the wire. How about that?
That's right. That's right. That's all that matters. And so, we're glad to be here with everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be with you, as William said a moment ago, here on Two Guys in the Bible. It's always good to be with you on Tuesday nights. And hope that you're benefiting from this series of studies that we're doing on the Messianic temple. We've been at this particular subject for a good little while, and there's a ways to go yet. Because we got a lot of ground to cover in regard to this very, very important subject. You know, William, I find it interesting that last week I was contacted by somebody telling me how how Dr. Michael Brown has been on a little bit of a tear lately, talking about how, those of the circumcision are going to be saved, and that the Messianic temple is still in our future, and what have you. And I told him, I said, well, contact him and talk to him again about debating me again. I said, but after our first 2 debates, he has gone on record saying that he's not interested in debating me anymore. And sure enough, they evidently contacted him from the report that I got, and he was just adamant, no, he's not interested in debating Don Preston anymore. Now, you would think if this is such a critical issue with him, one that he feels so confident about, that he would be willing to put those views, on display and under the microscope of cross-examination. But obviously, he doesn't seem to be willing to do that. He wants to be able to make his videos and not have any challenge to those videos, and yet he is known. He is known as a prolific debater. He is known as a man that will not only issue challenges but accept challenges from amillennialists, postmillennialists. Folks from different perspectives. And he accepted 2 of my challenges. But again, after 2 debates with me, he now is no longer interested in debating me at all. And I think that's revealing, personally. And by the way, I was on YouTube the other day, and I was just going through some different things, and I saw the little headline of our first two debates, and one of our debates, I've forgotten which one it was, but one of our debates had been viewed, and this was maybe it's been 2 or 3 weeks ago now. Anyway, a little bit ago, it had been viewed by almost 70,000 different times. So it certainly got a lot of exposure, and I have to tell you this: I have been contacted by a fairly significant number of people who told me that they had viewed those debates and that they're now full preterists as a direct result of it, because although they had been followers of Dr. Brown for years and had witnessed several of his debates with other people, that they had never, ever seen him challenged in such a way. And I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back at all. I'm simply pointing out he had never debated a full preterist before, had never encountered full preterist arguments, and it was very clear that he was unprepared to answer those arguments. And so I think it's very, very revealing that he just refuses now to debate me again.
Well, from the results that you just mentioned, I can understand why that is the case, because it was clear during the debate that he didn't have answers and was caught, off guard quite a few times during the discussion. And with the kind of feedback that you're getting, number one, that's great that you have people who are making the change following that discussion. And who knows, what else will come out of it as a result. But with those numbers, that's excellent. And it'll just keep going, from that. And then when you think about how many other people, if you've had 70,000 people exposed to it, then imagine also the number of people that some of them are sharing the information with as well. So, once you see that, you just have to know that there's a lot more people who are being influenced by it as a result.
Well, I think it's safe to say that for every one person that has viewed it, they're telling at least 2 or 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 people about it. So when you look at that kind of exposure, it really, really is very, very telling, and it's impressive. And, William, you and I have heard from different people at different times that we have challenged to debates. And they have said, I'm not going to give you the exposure to teach your doctrine. We have heard that several times from ministers in the churches of Christ. And the irony of that, for those who may not know the history and the background and the culture of the churches of Christ, folks, listen, you have to understand that traditionally in the churches of Christ, the leading authorities, to use that term, they would almost debate themselves to see who would get to debate somebody else. I mean, they would just fall all over themselves for the opportunity to debate dispensationalists, to debate Baptists or Methodists or Presbyterians or whoever on eschatology. And it didn't matter if it's postmillennialism or premillennialism. Oh, you bet that'll line up in line to debate someone like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of not debating us because they don't want to give us exposure is one of the most self-revealing. And it was literally shocking the very first time I heard it. Of course, now I'm used to hearing it, but it's stunning, really, when you hear these people with that kind of a background, with that kind of a track record of debating at the drop of a hat, debating almost anyone, and then turning around and refusing to debate us under any circumstance whatsoever. And we've told them that to their face as well, by the way. We've told those individuals that.
Yeah, on that point, I was making mention of it on the radio broadcast that I do on Sunday mornings, that one of the reasons they don't want to discuss things is because they said they don't want to give us a platform. Well, that may have been the case back then when, the only platform available was, the pulpit in the local congregation. But that is not the case today with social media, with, all kinds of videos, podcasts, etc. We all have our own platforms, and those platforms are growing on a daily basis and expanding.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
they're unable to have any impact on a platform. And by the way, most of the local churches have been closed down anyway, so they don't even have a platform. Many of them don't have a platform. So from that perspective,
Right.
There's no more excuse about not having a platform, especially when, we're in this virtual space right now and can be global just, at the punch of a button. So, and the fact that that is the case simply means that, we're continuing to spread. I've been keeping up with this. I think his name is Royal Given Gabozi in South Africa. I've just kind of watched him, and he's beginning to get a little traction there because other people, I was on a page the other day reading some comments, and they said, look, either put up some scripture to address the guy or stop just, making these ad hominem attacks and attacking him personally. He's presenting the Bible to you. So, the best way to respond to that is you bring your arguments and let them be examined. So when you start getting that kind of back and forth and conversation regarding what a man is teaching, that's letting you know that he's being effective because he's now, drawing the interest of others, and they're, now trying to figure out, okay, now what are we going to do about this? Because apparently he's having some impact. So, and that's happening in more than one place, of course. And it's just exciting to see these new guys coming up and, defending it. They're convicted, and they're beginning to make some waves where they are.
Well, yeah, you're exactly right, and that is exciting. I've never heard of that gentleman at all, so it's just another one of those brand new names to me. And like you said, when someone is making good arguments, and when it becomes obvious to outsiders, to people who are auditing, so to speak, those conversations, and it becomes apparent that the opponents of what's being said are not making scriptural arguments. All they're doing is attacking personality. Then that's very, very telling. And, we encounter that on Facebook all the time. I mean, it's something that happens on an everyday basis, especially on this Facebook page that I mentioned before that you're well aware of, Full Preterism, a thing of the past. And, I mean, over and over and over again, the enemies of what we're saying, they get to the point where all in the world they do is throw around insults. I mean, that's it. That's all they've got. And if they think they can repeat an argument that they think had some validity, and they think they can make the argument 100 times without answering a single objection to our that we have offered, without answering a single answer that we have given, and yet saying, you've never answered it, you can't answer it, blah, blah, blah. Folks, that is counterproductive. I mean, that's all there is to it. And it's so revealing of their weaknesses. And it just keeps happening over and over and over again. And then when you introduce, as I've been doing lately, I've been introducing, some real simple questions to the anti-preterist. For instance, just recently, I said, I've got a really important question to ask all of the anti-preterists on this board. Please identify the city that is called Babylon in the book of Revelation. And there's a diversity of views on there. But several of the people on there admit that it's that is Jerusalem. But some of the Church of Christ people that have been on there, that have been the most belligerent in their attacks of me, I mean, I reposted the question twice, William, and they refused to answer. They would go off on these other, tangents, totally unrelated issues, and saying, you've got to answer this question before we're going to answer your question. Well, let's see, folks. The original post was about Babylon. Why don't you answer the post about Babylon instead of demanding that we go off over here, and walk around the mountain onto some unrelated subject? My post is what we're talking about. Answer the question. Oh, man. Now, I mean, twice now I've posted it, and they absolutely refuse to answer. Just refuse to answer. So it's very revealing. And in a way, it's kind of fun, but in another way, it's very, very frustrating. But you see exposed very, very clearly, very undeniably, you see the weakness and the utter failure of the anti-preterist people to actually engage in the biblical discussion. Because, like I said, they devolve very, very quickly into, well, Preston's a liar and Bell's just like him. Neither one of them have an ounce of truth in them. They both hate the churches of Christ. They both hate tradition. They both hate history. I mean, on and on. They make such blatantly false claims, such as what I just mentioned, that anybody with even a smattering of understanding of what you and I have been saying for 40 years knows that they're lying. But it's all they can do. It's literally all they can do is to make false accusations.
That's definitely true. And, the point that you mentioned about they're not wanting to answer an argument and then try to bring up another argument, and they'll push that and just regurgitate it, all day long. It's nothing but a diversionary tactic, to distract someone from what the real issues are. And I noticed that when you go to their pages, when there's a solid argument that's presented to them, the first thing they will do is either try to move it to another location, try to bury it with a bunch of extraneous comments, and never get around to it. And then all the while claim that you haven't answered it. Or, as you say, they bring forth another argument. And I try to do that. So that's just been their, method of operation for quite some time. It's just disingenuous to me in terms of what they do in terms of trying to respond to, much of what's being said. And I remember, I think this guy, this Martin Asari, or whatever his name is, I think he was one of the ones who started the arguments on who is Babylon. And he's been answered on that so many, many times. And I think, as a matter of fact, he even admitted that Babylon was Jerusalem, and tried to make, of course, he's tried to make several arguments on it in the book of Revelation. But never has he been able to support the view that he has. And so it's been just interesting to watch all of that.
Yeah, he has to bring in an awful lot of speculation about the supposed seventh and eighth king, and yet completely ignores the fact that no matter what you say about the seventh and the eighth king of Revelation chapter 17, it still has to be kept within the confines of the imminent fulfillment. Completely ignores that. I mean, He completely ignores it, and a whole lot of other issues that he completely ignores as well. So anyway, that's a little bit of what's going on, ladies and gentlemen. I haven't had a tremendous amount of correspondence this week. I have had, let me take that back. Actually, I've had an awful lot of correspondence, some of it the comments on YouTube, some on Facebook, but a lot of private messages as well of people expressing their interest in studying more, people expressing their appreciation for our ministries, and so it's been a very gratifying week in that regard. I'd almost forgotten several of the comments that have been made in that regard. So, yeah, it's been a very good week.
Well, excellent. Very good.
So we need to get back to our examination of the Messianic temple and Ezekiel. And I only wanted to make one or two closing points here on Isaiah chapter 44. Last week we talked about the fact that it mentions the fact in verse 28 that priests, the Levites, oh boy, I hope my computer's not going to restart on me. It says your device will restart. Okay, I'll tell them to do that after a while. It seemed like my computer chooses the time either immediately before we go on air or even during on air that it decides that it's going to do something weird. It's going to reboot or refresh or do something like that. So
every time
that's what was happening.
Every time I hear about that, I'm reminded of that discussion. I think it was between either Bill Gates and Microsoft and the CEO of General Motors, and they were talking about their products. And I don't have the exact story in mind, but basically it was Microsoft who attacked GM about their product, claiming that it wasn't a good product. And one of the things that the response was to Microsoft was that they have a product that shuts down in the middle of operation, and they were just talking about what if you had a car that operated like that. But it's quite humorous to read. Someone sent it to me a while back, and I still have it, but you can find it on the internet. But it's quite funny to read.
I bet it is. Yeah, I've been watching, and then we'll get on into this. I've been watching over on the History Channel, even this afternoon, about the story of some of the great industrial leaders of America. John D. Rockefeller. The things that those early men did. We're certainly not condoning a lot of the underhanded, high-handed, authoritarian ways that of the things that they did, but I mean, how just a handful of men transformed America into a world power. Henry Ford, and how he won a lawsuit against a conglomerate of men who claimed that they had patent on the automobile, and they lost. Their loss of that lawsuit revolutionized industry in America and brought the assembly line into full play, which transformed America. And Rockefeller, of course, with all of his oil wealth, and we can talk about, like I said, we can talk about some of his abuses, and they did break up his monopoly of Standard Oil and what have you. And yet a lot of people don't realize that in his lifetime he gave away, in the money of his day, over $550 million, which would equate to over the number would equate to over $70 billion in today's money. So he was a philanthropist. He was generous to the nth degree. But the point being that men can change society. They can change the world through dedication. They can change the world through hard work and what have you. And oh my goodness, my head is stopping up on me like crazy. So it's good old allergy season here in Ardmore, Oklahoma, which it's allergy season about 11 and a half months out of the year. So it's just something I have to get used to, and I have to struggle with almost all of the time. But anyway, that's just a fascinating part of history, of American history, and it speaks to how America is such a country of incredible opportunity for those who are willing to put in the work, those who have a vision. And, you and I certainly are not on the level of Rockefeller or Carnegie or those men. I'm not suggesting that, but it's very gratifying, William. I know it is to you. It is to me. From the time that we began working together to the current state of the preterist movement, it is so gratifying as well as humbling to have been a part of seeing the preterist movement move forward in the way that it has done and the way that it is growing. Each of us has our own independent ministry, as well as the fact that we have worked together very, very closely through the years. We've traveled together, we've spoken together, we've debated together, and so we've made an incredibly good, productive partnership and continue to do so. On a different level, of course, in a different realm and sphere than the men that were on TV that I was watching a while ago. Nonetheless, it demonstrates how perseverance, hard work, and dedication can have an impact in the world. And that's exactly what has happened with our ministries.
Well, certainly, it's hard to find anyone who has worked as hard as you have and as consistently as you have over the years in helping to, establish the platform for covenant eschatology. I know there are some great men who preceded you, but at the same time, for someone who has been on the firing line, all of the debates that you've had, the books that you've written, and the presentations that you have made and continue to make, those are just absolutely of tremendous blessing and a foundation of exegetical wealth to the community. So for years to come, just imagine the fruit that it will continue to bear. And if we have developed what we have out of what we began with, just imagine. Yes, think about that. What will be developed out of what exists today moving forward? It's, it's almost hard to imagine what will come out of what's already here and what has been developed and continues to be developed even as we speak. That is just going to, I think, help to just create the momentum and revolutionized the subject of eschatology for the world in time to come. And that's not just the two of us, but that's all of the guys who are working.
Well, and there are certainly an awful lot of people that are out there on the firing line that are contributing. It's just, you mentioned the fellow there in South Africa, and we constantly hear about new people. You have people contact you and say, "Hey, have you watched the YouTube videos of this guy or that guy or what have you? Man, that guy is some kind of a fantastic preacher and teacher of covenant eschatology." And you're going, "Oh, well, never even heard of the guy. Wow, this is fantastic." And so, I've heard of a guy named Paul White. Now, I've tried to contact the man. He's out of California, but I've tried repeatedly to get a hold of him. I haven't not been able to get a hold of him. I've watched a couple of his videos. He is an excellent teacher, and I've had any number of people contact me and say, "Man, you got to get to know this guy." And I would love to if he would ever answer my attempts to reach out to him. I don't know why he hasn't responded. I don't know if he's ever gotten my post for sure. I can't imagine that all of the posts that I have sent him have not one of them have reached him. It's possible, but nonetheless, I honestly don't know why he would not respond to me. But my point being, there are lots of people out there that agree with covenant eschatology, that are developing their own ministries, that are doing a great job of teaching. And couldn't help but laugh when you talked about what we had to start with way back when, because we had, Max King had written his book, Spirit of Prophecy, which unfortunately I still haven't read all of it to this day. I've read some of it, but not all of it. you had one little small journal that was being produced, and you had one lectureship being held in the world. We just did not have a ton of resources. The internet had not come along. And so when we would hear of somebody that believed like we did, we would pick up the phone and call them up. And that's at the time when the phone rates were 25, 35, 40 cents a minute. And yet we'd pick up the phone and we'd call people like William Bell. When I heard of him, I was on the phone with another guy one night asking him questions, and he just told me, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Now, the reason being is he was a full preterist, but he didn't want that news out. He didn't want anybody to know about it because he was getting ready to retire. He has retired, but he still doesn't want anybody to know he's a full preterist. But he told me, he said, I just don't want to talk to you anymore because if it gets out that I believe this, I'll lose my retirement, and I can't afford to do that. But he said, there's a guy in Memphis, Tennessee that you need to call. He gave me the phone number, this guy named William Bell, and I called him up. And that was in 1981. And boy, oh boy, those phone bills back then.
Yeah, I remember you used to talk about those. My phone bill this month is $280-something.
Yes, sir. And, my wife had showed me the phone bill and said, do you see this? Well, yeah, I do, but. And so we just kept right on going. And so to go from there to where we are right now, to where we have unlimited access on the internet, we have cell phones with unlimited text, and data. And I mean, on and on it goes, folks. We're living in amazing times. And, well, we got sidetracked there. So we'll get back to it. I could keep going like that because it really is a fascinating story, and it's a really cool story, of just of the relationship that started between William Bell and myself. And, he says he doesn't know anybody works any harder than me. About the only person I know that has done that is a guy named William Bell, because he certainly put in the work as well. And his work shows and is reaping the benefits, reaping the harvest, in an absolutely marvelous way. All right, folks. Anyway, I just wanted to make one final point on Ezekiel 44, where it talked about the priest not having a possession in the land. And segueing from that to the fact that Revelation chapter 1 and verse 5 talks about the fact that Christ has created us to be a kingdom of priests and that we offer sacrifices. But the New Testament is very clear that all believers are, in fact, priests. Well, if priests don't have an inheritance in physical land, ladies and gentlemen, think about the implications of that. Because, let's see here. The Reformed amillennial view, the postmillennial view, is that one of these days, when the Lord comes, he's going to have a restored earth. And saints, Christians, are going to rule on earth. Now, I have to tell you, folks, this whole concept of Christ having to rule personally, physically, bodily on earth is one that just, number one, it won't hold any scriptural water. But number two, just today, I have to let me draw this up. Let me get into my file here. I have to share with you a quote that I found just today. That's not it. It is a quote from Kenneth Gentry. Well, Huh. Where did it go? Where did it go? Where did it go? Let me try this. Anyway, William, do you have that quote handy? I know I sent it to you.
The one from Kenneth Gentry?
Yes.
Okay, I can pull it up here just shortly. Give me a second.
Well, let me, because I...
No, you go ahead. I'll find the quote. Just go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, we're told all of the time, ladies and gentlemen, that that Christ has to come back literally, visibly, and bodily, physically is the
and
term,
I have it.
Okay, very good. And when he does, he's going to rule on earth over a nationalistic kingdom. Now, a couple of years ago, I had a debate in Oregon with Harold Eberly, who is a Reformed amillennialist. And during the Q&A session, someone in the audience asked him, "Do you believe that Christ is going to rule over an earthly kingdom?" Harold Eberly answered, "Yes. When Christ returns, he will rule over an earthly kingdom." In my 2012 debate with Joel McDermott here in Ardmore, Oklahoma, one of the questions was asked, do you believe Christ is going to come back to rule over an earthly physical kingdom? He answered, yes. Well, just today, while I was doing some research on an unrelated subject, to be honest about it, I was actually researching the views of the all-millennialists and post-millennialists on Ezekiel chapter 37. I grabbed a copy of Kenneth Gentry's book, He Shall Have Dominion, because I wanted to see Kenneth Gentry's views on Ezekiel 37. And by the way, he does believe that Ezekiel 37 is currently fulfilled right now in Christ and the church. But when I just pulled the book off the shelf and it fell open, I think it's page 476, if I'm not mistaken. And I sent the quote to William, to Daniel Rogers, to Larry Siegel, and to a few other people because I was absolutely stunned at the quotation and of how the quotation completely falsifies Kenneth Gentry's eschatology and that of Harold Eberly. How it falsifies the view of James Jordan that I debated some years ago. It completely refutes the idea that Christ is going to come back and rule on earth in a nationalistic, earthly, physical kingdom. William, read that quote to us.
All right, here we are. Why should it be necessary that Christ's kingdom require his physical presence on earth? Does not Satan have a kingdom on earth, although he's only spiritually present? Matthew 12:26, Luke 4:6. Do not Satan's covenantally faithful servants on earth manifest his power in history? Is Satan's kingdom any less a kingdom just because he is not reigning from a throne on earth? What kind of necessary glory is it that requires that Christ personally and corporeally rule on earth over a political kingdom that revolts against him at the end? Revelation 27-9. This view insists on a second humiliation of Christ. All emphasis here is Kenneth Gentry.
Now, folks, you I mean, honestly, you really have to catch the power of that quote. Why must Christ come back to earth and rule on earth in a physical body? That would amount to another humiliation. And yet Kenneth Gentry believes, the Reformed amillennial view believes, postmillennialists believe, that Christ will, in fact, that he must return to earth and rule over a physical kingdom on earth. I mean, that's just stunning. And the question is, why? I mean, if Kenneth Gentry can challenge the dispensational view on that, why can we not challenge his views on that? Now, folks, this gets directly to our subject of the millennial temple. Okay? You might be thinking, well, why in the world are you bringing that up, Preston? Well, the reason for it is, and this is part of the irony and the self-contradiction that is to be found in the amillennial and in the postmillennial world. On the one hand, they condemn the dispensational world that says Christ must come back. He must rule over a nationalistic, geopolitical, quasi-military type of a kingdom in which the kingdom or of the temple of Ezekiel 44 is established. You have a Zadokite priesthood, you have the Levitical priesthood, you have animal sacrifices as defined in Ezekiel 45. You have, which, by the way, demands physical circumcision for them to function as priesthood. And on it goes. So the amillennialists and the postmillennialists condemn the dispensationalists for their view of the necessity for Christ to come back and rule on earth in that physical kingdom. And yet they both turn right around and they tell us, again, as Harold Eberly did, as Joel McDermott did, they tell us Christ must return to rule over a physical kingdom. Now, here's where it gets real interesting. The dispensationalists say, well, there's got to be this literal physical temple with this literal physical priesthood, literal physical sacrifices. Kenneth Gentry and the postmillennialists and amillennialists say, it's going to be a literal kingdom. It's going to be a physical kingdom. Get one of those fellas to say, yes, there's going to be a literal physical temple. You know, William, is it not a legitimate question? Is the question well-grounded, well-justified to say, if you're going to argue that Christ must return in a physical body to rule on earth over a physical kingdom, is it not perfectly justified to say, okay, in this physical kingdom, Mr. Amillennialist and Mr. Postmillennialist, that you insist Christ must rule over, will that be in a literal physical Jerusalem, restored Jerusalem? Will he serve as a priest himself in a literal physical temple and offer up literal animal sacrifices? Is that not legitimate to ask?
Oh, yes, it's legitimate. As a matter of fact, in Randall Price's book, chapter 23, page 533, he cites a quote from John Schmidt. But first, he has two quotes here. And I want to read them both so you can see the contrast here. He says, and this first one is from Edmund P. Clowney. Jesus Christ is the only mediator, his blood, the final sacrifice. There can be no going back. If there is a way back to the ceremonial law, to the types and shadows of what has now become the bondage of legalism, then Paul labored and ran in vain. More than that, Christ died in vain. End quote. All right. The next quote is from John Schmidt. Is it heretical to believe that a temple and sacrifices will once again exist? Ezekiel himself believed it was a reality and the future home of Messiah. Then it becomes not heresy to believe that a temple and sacrifices will exist. Rather, it is almost a heresy to not believe this, especially because it is a part of God's infallible word. The burden on us is to determine how it fits, not its reality. And I think what Price, of course, argues in the book is, and you can see that as he goes forward, but the fact of this latter quote by John Smith, because that's what he's trying to justify.
Certainly. Because Randall Price is one of the foremost advocates of a restored temple to be established in the millennium. Of course, it's really, I think it's revealing. He and Thomas Ice wrote a book in 1982 entitled Ready to Rebuild. And boy, they set forth the idea that the temple was just about to be rebuilt any time. They were gathering the materials. Now, look, folks, I've got to share this with you. when I was in high school, 1967, 1968, 68 when I graduated, I well remember stories in the newspaper, stories, and some of the stories were picked up and answered in some of the theological journals within the Churches of Christ, responding to the claims. But the claims were being made. There are train loads of building supplies for the temple in Jerusalem, traveling to Jerusalem on a monthly basis. It's incredible. The temple is going to be rebuilt at any time. Now, again, folks, this was in the 60s. And then Randall Price and Thomas Ice wrote the book Ready to Rebuild in 1982, claiming that just any time construction was going to begin. Well, here we are now in 2021, and they still haven't laid a stone. I mean, it's just more and more and more of the same to the issue. If the dispensationalists are wrong for demanding a physical kingdom, a physical priesthood, physical sacrifices, what justifies the idea of a physical kingdom? I mean, after all, let's face it, folks, if you're going to insist on a physical kingdom on planet Earth, what is your justification for denying the restoration of Jerusalem? Jerusalem is set forth in every bit of a realistic way as the earth and the land. So if the earth and the land are literal, why isn't the kingdom literal? Well, okay, the amillennial, reformed amillennial and postmillennial. Well, yeah, it is a literal kingdom. Okay, it's physical? Yes, it's physical. Well, then once again, why isn't the city of Jerusalem literal and physical? And why isn't the temple literal and physical? And they go off into these discussions and they say, "Oh no, the temple and the priesthood, the sacrifices, those are all spiritual because they've been spiritualized in Christ, and yet not the land." To me, that is an incredible inconsistency, and one, by the way, for which I have never read a single Reformed amillennialist, postmillennialist give any kind of substantive rationale for saying, yes, physical planet, physical kingdom, but not a physical Jerusalem, not a physical temple, not physical sacrifices. I fail to see how anyone could make the argument of the physical kingdom on earth and yet deny physical city, physical temple, et cetera, et cetera. Yet that's precisely what they do. Well, okay, back to the issue here in Ezekiel 44:28. The priest would not have an inheritance in the land. I brought that up because I wanted to point out that in Jewish law, and by the way, the historical rabbis certainly agree with this, no foreigner, no pagan, to use that term, could ever have or own property in the land. And so, if you're not an Israelite, you're not supposed to own the land. Now, according to Exodus Exodus 34, the land belonged to God anyway. It didn't really belong to the people. Not at all. And so the Lord told them they were not to sell their inheritance. In other words, when the land was allotted to the 12 tribes, with the exception of Levi, so when that land was allotted to the children of Israel by family, by tribe and by family, they were never to permanently sell the land. They had provision made based upon their feast days. They had provision made in the Feast of Jubilees. Pardon me, that every 7 years, the land, for instance, if they had become poor, they had to sell the property to keep from becoming a slave. At the end of the 7 years, the person to whom they sold that property had to give it back. Well, you can imagine what kind of abuses that led to. But nonetheless, there was provision in the Torah that people who owned property absolutely were not to sell their property. It belonged by allotment. It belonged to Israel and to no other people. No non-Israelite was to own property in Israel. They had no inheritance in the land. Okay? So if the amillennial and the postmillennial paradigm is accurate, that the Lord, number one, has to come back literally, visibly, physically, and rule on earth, if the earth is the inheritance of the Lord, well, number one, no Israelite could have an inheritance in it, or excuse me, no Levite could have an inheritance in it. And number two, no non-Israelite could have an inheritance in the land or in the earth on this reestablished, glorified earth. William, it sounds to me like in the amillennial and in the postmillennial paradigm that those who are not Israelites are still going to continue to be strangers and pilgrims on this earth. Because we don't get to own anything. We don't have any inheritance in it. Did that make sense? Did I lay that out there properly?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if they have no inheritance in the land and it's going to be this physical, materialistic fulfillment that many of them are arguing for, then, of course, those restrictions will have to continue as well.
So that, to me, that just gets back, pardon me, it just gets back to the problems that the traditional views of eschatology encounter, and yet they like to say we're the ones with the problems. They like to say covenant eschatology doesn't agree with anything, and yet I had a young man on Facebook today chiding the churches of Christ, but more specifically me, of course, because reject the Nicene Creed, and I feel like that we've got the right to reject the traditions of men. And I wrote back and I said, well, as a matter of fact, I do. I said, I feel like I've got a perfect right to reject any tradition of man that doesn't agree with what the scriptures have to say. And I told him, I said, you ought to try that. It's really pretty good. It's a good life to lead. And I said, yes, I do agree with Alexander Campbell in saying, guess what? The creeds are not inspired. I don't owe a creed any allegiance whatsoever. My only allegiance is to the Bible. And once again, I told him, you really ought to try it. It's liberating. I don't think he appreciated that much, but that's okay. And so, we get all of these attacks from the people who are so hung up on tradition and the creeds. Yet when you just really, really, really pressure them and you just challenge them, are you saying that the creeds are inspired? Well, I've had some of them actually equivocate on that and say, well, they may be. Well, show it to me. Show me where they're inspired. But most of them, when they are really, really cornered, backed into a corner, they will admit, well, no, the creeds are not inspired in the sense that the Bible is. Well, okay. if the creeds are not inspired, what allegiance do I owe to them? I've had people tell me, well, because those men were so close to the original writers. Well, that sounds pretty good on the surface of it, actually. The closer to the original writers, you would think would have at least more of an opportunity to know the truth. I mean, after all, they are closer to the actual apostles. The trouble for that is the fact that Jesus himself said, and it was echoed by Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, but Jesus himself said that there was going to be an apostasy of such wide-scale proportions that he actually said in Luke chapter 18, 6 to 8, when the Son of Man comes, will he even find faith on the earth? Now, folks, just think about that. That's a first century reality to exist immediately prior to and at the time of the coming of Christ in the first century. Jesus posed that that rhetorical question. When the Son of Man comes, will he even find faith on the earth? Very, very quick anecdote. We're running out of time, but some years ago, I was having a formal public debate with a guy, and during a break, a minister from the Church of Christ came up to me, and he said, look, you've said a lot of things that are pretty challenging, but he said, you simply cannot be true because he said, Paul said that before the coming of the Lord, you had to have the apostasy of the appearance of the man of sin. And he said, that hasn't happened. I said, let me ask you a question. Do you believe that Matthew 24, verses 4 to 34, speak of the first century and events leading up to the fall of Jerusalem? And he said, oh, absolutely. He said, that's my position. I said, okay, then let's go to verses 10 to 12. In those verses, because of persecution, the love of many will grow cold. And because of false teachers, the love of many will grow cold. But I said, verse 12 is very, very significant because it speaks of the fact that not only as a result of persecution and false teachers, but it speaks of the fact that as a result of the combination of the false teachers and the persecution that was going to come, and as a result of the increase of lawlessness, it says the love of, and in the Greek it is the love of the many, and as the New American Standard and many other translations render it, the love of the majority will grow cold. And I said, now, let's go to Luke chapter 18. Now, he had obviously never seen that in Matthew chapter 24, how Jesus predicted that the love of the majority of people would grow cold prior to AD 70. And then I took him to Luke chapter 18. And I said, how could that be true? And he stood there and looked at me. He said, you know what? I have no idea how to answer that. He said, I've never seen those verses. So he said, I see exactly what you're saying. He said, I'm going to have to study it some more. And I said, well, okay, great. That's all I can ask of anyone. So who knows what happened after that. But the point of it is that when we look at the testimony of those early church leaders, that doesn't mean just because they were close to the first century that they were inspired, number one. And it doesn't mean that they were guaranteed to be right, number two, because Jesus said there was going to be an apostasy of the majority of people, and that majority apostasy came true. And folks, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us here on Two Guys and a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And with that, I will say good night and God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say, have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.